Hey, hey, hi guys. I hope everyone is doing well and also keeping up the pace of the videos that I've been uploading. I am going to look at a slightly different category of interviews today, and this is mostly to do with your analytical thinking, primarily focused on estimating, let's say, the number of newspapers that are sold in the US or the number of Xbox, devices that were sold in a particular year in the US or any other region, right? So I think the category of these questions comes under a round called guesstimate. And guesstimates are very common, especially for consulting firms. But for product management interviews, I think it really depends on the firm. If the firm basically is let's say, looking at someone with a lot of focus on data, right? Then I think you might see this round actually happening, with you. And if the firm probably is, looking at more, let's say, analytical skills in general, than let's say some of the other aspects of product management, then also I think this round is going to definitely happen. It might also be present in one of the other, let's say, product execution kind of rounds, wherein a quick 10-15 minutes discussion on your thought process, on how do you actually arrive at these kind of numbers or guesstimates. I think that can be tested. So without further delay, let's jump into it, right? uh, so typically, I think the questions will be very open-ended. So for this particular video, I'm going to look at how many webcams were basically sold in the US, right, during, let's say, a particular year, which is 2020, two. So I think typically what happens here is that you have to start off with some assumptions. That's, I think, the basic mistake that most of the folks do that I have interviewed, and even during my consulting days, I think there was a lot of tendency to write directly, jump into the methodology, and just come up with some answer. So don't do that. I think start out with your assumptions. So here, for example, right, we need to understand who are the users who are typically going to buy webcams, right? And it is very similar to your user personas. If you're looking at from a product management perspective, it is very similar to your user personas. For webcams that are sold, right? I mean, I could also call these as customer segments, right? So I'm classifying these under three different categories. Number one is the households for personal use. Number two is the schools and classrooms for education purposes. And number three is the occasional or maybe the regular online gamers, right? Now, this is one assumption about my customer segment. There's another assumption that I'm going to go with, which is on an average, a webcam refresh, cycle typically would be 2 to 3 years. So for our case, I think we'll go with 3 years refresh. This is actually similar to the product replacement, cycle, right? So let's say, or a product repurchase, right, or a product resubscription, right, if it is a, let's say, SaaS or a subscription based product, right? So why I'm trying to draw parallels is that you should understand that guesstimates are not just simple number crunching exercise to see how good you are at maths. You should also be able to actually explain the reasoning behind your assumptions and link it to the product, the product cycle itself, right? So now getting down, I think, with the calculations, right? So let's look at, I think, the number one category, which is the household. So for households, basically, I am assuming US has, let's say, 100 million households, right? Very high internet penetration is possible because of the I would say in general the literacy rate, right? And 80% basically out of those internet uh, owning houses do have a PC or a laptop at home, right? So that's roughly around 70 million devices. Now, what I'm going to do is that within each of these segments, if I have to maybe like split it further and make some assumptions, I'm going to call that out. But those are not necessarily like the main assumptions of the problem statement. You can have assumptions within, I think, these calculations. If you don't have it, like the numbers are going to be maybe slightly off, but no one is going to like hold a argument against like you did not go with assumptions while you did the calculation. So stating assumptions upfront is very important when you're doing the calculations. If you realize that okay, I still need to go ahead with like certain kind of split in the data, or let's say I'm looking at uh, bringing in more granularity or detail to the calculations, you can do that. So here, for example, we are assuming that three-fourth of these devices that we talked about, the 70 million devices, these are laptops, and one-fourth are PCs. So 50 million laptops basically, right, and 20 million, let's say, PCs, right, all 70 million devices in overall. So I think one another important part I would like to highlight here is that the calculations numbers are of importance here, but those are not the only important things, right? I mean, how you split, I think, your categories, how you actually do the percentages, how do you arrive at the final numbers, I think those are like equally important. So here, for example, I'm assuming that 10% of the laptop owners do buy an external webcam, which means that 5 million. So 5 million is basically coming out of 10% of 50 million. And then because our refresh cycle was 3 years, right? I am looking at 1.7 million webcams. Now, I think for the PCs, right? I'm assuming that 50% of the PCs or the folks who have PCs will buy an external webcam. So, which means that out of the 20 million, 50% would be 10 million, and 10 million by 3 because our refresh cycle is still going to be the same. Here, you could argue that I will have a different refresh cycle for PCs. Fine. I mean, if you want to do that, go ahead and create another step and then arrive at a number. So this is 3.3 million, and the number of laptops having an external webcam, that is 1.7 million. So total number is around 5 million, right? So this is the first segment. Now coming to the second segment, right? So the second segment is basically going to focus on schools and classrooms, right? So this is basically your large educational institutions, for example, and maybe online classes, that are held. So students basically are in an age group of 10 to 18 for this, and minor again, and minor assumption for this segment is that it is a normal distribution. It doesn't have to be a normal distribution, but from a calculation perspective, we are assuming that a lifespan of 80 years is there, which means that uh, out of this 8 year age group, right, we will have around let's say 33 million students, right? So 330 million is basically the overall population, right? And out of that, how many are falling in that 8 age group is around 33 million. And one webcam for every 30 students, again, a fair assumption. That number can change. So this comes out to be around 1 million. And I'm assuming again that the refresh cycle is going to be that of 3 years, which means that around 300 webcams, right? So this is another segment, that is consuming webcams. Also coming to, let's say, the hardcore maybe users, right? Or power users of, let's say, webcam, right? This is the gamer category, the male heavy population out of the 150 male population, right? We are assuming, I think, 300, let's say, odd 300 million folks, I think, in the US. Let's say that 5% of those are like actual, like very hardcore gamers, right? So I'm getting around seven and a half, million gamers. And Obviously every gamer would prefer to have his or her own webcam, right? So refresh cycle, I would say, would be less for gamers. So I'm not going with that 3 year refresh cycle, and because I'm changing an assumption here, I'm going to mention this and do the calculation accordingly. So for the 7.5 million gamers, 1.5 is the refresh cycle, which means 5 million gaming webcams have to be available, right? So basically, I am looking at 5 million plus 300K plus 5 million. Now, you would have noticed that in each of these segments, the population numbers are basically uh, varying a lot. I'll basically come to that. The reason for that is that in the first segment, I'm looking at households. I'm not looking at the overall number of people living in the United States. So if I'm looking at the number of people in the United States, household, typically a house will have like a husband, wife, and a child, right? I mean, that's the basic assumption, right? So this 330 million is nowhere related to 100 million, but that factor of three is basically coming in. The factor of three is basically coming in because we are looking at households and individuals. In the first segment, we are looking at household. In the second segment, we are looking at the overall number of folks who are living in, right? I think this gave you a good clarity on uh, how do you tackle like guesstimates questions. I will leave like close out the video with giving you an exercise on estimating, let's say, how many number of newspapers are sold in India, right? So what I can give you hints is on the following. India's population numbers 140, let's say, CR, right? Households, you can do the math. uh, Another hint would be that per house you need only maybe one or two newspapers, right? uh, Again, I would say the approach that you should take would should be very similar to this, wherein you segregate the families, let's say the household, also segregated based on, let's say, education, government institutes, right? uh, Private companies, and then also maybe derive the numbers based on those segments and come up with the total number. So I hope this video was useful as far as guesstimates are concerned. Until the next time, do stay tuned to my channel, like and subscribe, and do leave comments if there is any topic that you would like me to cover. So thanks for now.